the infrastructure sector, just because of the critical nature of infrastructure, can be sometimes quite hesitant to share information across organizations or across sectors. So I think there's a lot of enthusiasm at first, and it's something we need to do. But just like with any change cycle, there'll then be maybe a bit more hesitation as it gets a bit trickier about how you try and embed it into existing workflows. There's so much infrastructure to be built, and we need to make sure that every next project takes the lessons from previous ones.
Hello, you're listening to Sustainable Infrastructure, a Norris podcast where engineers, policymakers, and construction leaders share their experience on how they act for sustainable infrastructure. I'm Roland Montaignac, co-founder at Horse, and today I'm receiving David Hoare, product lead at Moata Carbon Portal at Mott MacDonald. Welcome, David. Nice to have you here. And can you please give a short introduction of your background and how you working on sustainable infrastructure?
Excellent. Hi, Renaud, and thanks so much for having me on the podcast. My name is David Orr. I'm the product lead for the Carbon Portal at Mott MacDonald as a global infrastructure organization. I've been interested in infrastructure for a long time. I think it's been a particular interest in seeing how we can try and grow the needs of emerging markets when it comes to new buildings, airports, water, energy facilities, quickly and in a sustainable way. A large area of interest is making sure that that can be done in a really inclusive way. And so that's been a real focus of mine over my career so far. So focused on some initial summers as a student working with Export Development Canada and the great infrastructure work that they do. And then more recently over the last 8 years with Mott MacDonald, working with governments, with policymakers, with private sector organizations to try and make sustainable change. It's a fantastic space, and it's great to have a chance here to talk a bit more about it with yourself.
Excellent. So sustainability as a core personal value. That's what I hear as well, and that's also where we meet similar people and wanted to make this difference. So maybe also when you started at Mott MacDonald, was it already to deliver this carbon portal, or was there a moment where this comes to you? It came to you?
Yeah, so for the first 5 years at Mott MacDonald, I focused more on the international development side of the business. And so that was looking a lot at work in emerging markets. So I did a fair bit of work in India and Kenya and many other countries, looking predominantly at urban development, but also some energy and health programs as well. So absolutely loved it. But I guess a key project which I just loved, but also helped to set up my further interest in decarbonization was some of the work that we did with the governments of India and Kenya to support their decarbonization pathways and tools that supported those. And so through that, I got to know more about decarbonization, the importance of it, and then about 3 years ago, moved over to head up our Moata Carbon Portal. So this is a solution which we work with organizations around the world, public sector, private sector, to support them decarbonize at scale. And it's been great. Got a great team, and it's really grown over the last few years. And it's, I think, that nice confluence where you bring climate, digital, and a lot of innovation together, and that's been a real focus over the last 3 years.
Amazing, 3 topics together. Just one compliment here. This carbon portal was there before you. Can you just explain, how it's been created and why eventually? Where was the request to work on this?
Yeah, so I think like with many things, it started with a spreadsheet many years ago, and so I think it's been around for just over 10 years. So just had his 10th birthday, but over the last few years, it's really tried to expand into other sectors. So initially, it started a lot more in transport. And looking at supporting organizations there. It still very much does, but it also looks a lot at other linear infrastructure sectors. So that's energy and water, especially. And I think a big change that we've made over that time is to try and ensure that it's not only carbon specialists who can use it and feel like they can, get some great results off the back of it, but also trying to extend their expertise and embed it into users who may have less carbon experience. So part of that is really supporting engineers and designers who have such a core role in driving down carbon, because as of course know, the earliest that you can consider carbon in a project and help to design it, the better it can be. It's a very clear link there, and so that's where we think there's a real opportunity to support those individuals at those early stages of a project to act with conviction, use great carbon expertise supported by our carbon specialists to make those decisions, and hopefully as well, when those decisions get made for one project, they can be taken forward to others as well.
and learn from them. And I would like
Absolutely.
to come back to this, giving the power to engineers to have this kind of impact. Before going that, again to these first days and first years of Moata, do you do you perceive a tipping point where a given project, a given customer, an area where it changed dimension or it changed traction within also Mott MacDonald, this capacity to transform or address a carbon measurement and capability?
Yeah, I think we're seeing more and more countries and more sectors um, expect that carbon assessments and carbon decision making
Hmm.
is considered a standard. I think the past 2080 standard has been core in terms of driving that forward and trying to say this is what good can look like, and for
Mm.
organizations to try and meet that. But I think particularly when we're working with clients, what's been really exciting and in terms of genuine transformation is when they bring their supply chain on board. Because
Mhm.
all of a sudden, instead of it being one organization working with one project, it's that might just be one organization, but they're working across their entire portfolio. And then there's another layer to that, which is they've got 30 to 100 supply chain members, be they contractors, designers, project managers, whatever organization they're working with, that they're all acting in a unified way. And it means that the targets are clearly outlined, and there's a way that all the organizations working with that client to pursue those lofty, ambitious targets can be met. And it's interesting because it often means that you've got champions within each of those organizations who take this on and say, okay, yes, client X may have suggested we use the carbon portal to help achieve these goals, but also something that they can try and embed within their organization, because it's quite likely they're also looking to develop a carbon management approach, and so it helps to be mutually reinforcing, and that's something which has been great to see, and then particularly because a lot of those supply chain members will end up working with other clients, they can take those lessons that they've used and apply them elsewhere. And is that kind of community of learning, which I think is particularly important for decarbonization.
Yeah, and this there is a power behind these ambassadors or champions, as you call them. I think there is a real capacity to replicate and scale through this champion. Do you have you? You probably have met a lot of them. Would you make an exercise to define, what characterize these champions within organization that you work with?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't think there's any kind of magic recipe, but I think it's a combination of a few things. I think it's very much individuals who are proactive and keen to be curious and learn new things about how carbon and sustainability more widely can be a power for good within their sector. But I think it's also a recognition that adopting sustainable practices is just quite frankly good for business. And I think there's a greater recognition that economic growth and sustainability can go hand in hand, and it's not always seen as an extra. And I think that's something which is important and why it's so key that we embed considerations about carbon in existing workflows, and make sure that it's supporting individuals who are very, very busy, but know that they need to meet certain requirements. And so the more that we can do to try and make sure that what is perhaps quite a new topic like decarbonization is actually maybe hopefully not that scary, and it's something that they can wrestle with, and more importantly act with conviction, to help to make that change. And so I think what's been exciting as well is seeing how sometimes these champions that we have in various organizations are often happy to share their ideas with others. And it's both ideas, but it's also data. And the infrastructure sector, just because of the critical nature of infrastructure, can be sometimes quite hesitant to share information across organizations or across sectors. And we've had a few examples in New Zealand, and also some in the UK, where we've got these champions saying, you know what, the wider industry would benefit. We might be competitors, or we might be peers, depending on their structure. But it's important that this sound, richly researched, but also very directly applicable data extend beyond just one organization, and that they can share it with others. And that's the thing where you see some really cool innovation happening. And so it's a really impressive trait that those champions have.
Yeah, and my feeling, I mean, when you said the word conviction, I really think that they are strongly believing that this is the thing to do. We need to go into that direction, and they will also be able to engage the people around them to achieve that, and really to make this achievement. There is a right balance to find. Maybe also to come back to your point on engineers now, and when you say deploying systematically within organization this carbon measurement capacity, and what's your feedback or experience on finding the right level of something that is easy enough to be adopted and deployed, but at the same time we need to stay really focused on the quality and the trust we need to provide while developing such approach. So I'm interested in your experience in that as well.
Yeah, no, that trust is key, and it's key for a couple of reasons. They one recognize that individuals are making decisions that are sound, and that can also hopefully be replicated as well. That is not seen as just a one-off thing, but something that can be used in a wider range of projects, and ideally in a wide range of sectors. So that trust is essential. I think it's also really looking at the project lifecycle as well, and where individuals need different types of information and different levels of detail at different stages. And I think that's important, that the digital solutions and the approaches that are used reflect that. And so something we've looked at is saying, right, it's important that you have quite detailed carbon assessments later on in the project, but you also need to look at benchmarks. You also need to look at what the expected carbon impact is up front, because that allows you to say, okay, of these three options, maybe we go with the second one because it's lower carbon, and hopefully it's lower cost as well. And so one of the things we've used to try and take that forward is recognize that at the bidding stage, or when you're kicking off a project, there may be individuals who have less carbon experience, and that's absolutely fine. But we've tried to recognize that there might be that gap, and use trusted data, to go back to that trust point, to build an AI assistant that can help with that. So currently it's used just by Mott MacDonald itself, but it allows you to, as a designer or project manager or whatever your role, it's open to anyone in the business. You can say, right, I'm looking to build a low carbon airport terminal, and it's in this city, and experiences this type of extreme weather event once every 2 years, and it needs to have X number of people passing through the terminal per year. How can we do this in a lower carbon way? And so it can help to then respond to that by saying, right, here's some material suggestions you might consider, and here are some design suggestions you might consider as well. And the data that backs that is a lot of Mott MacDonald design data and also some global standards and what good can look like from a decarbonization perspective. And it's been really interesting to see, A, how it can help to make individuals a bit more aware, but also helps to meet them maybe where they are in the project. So they might not need a detailed assessment at that stage. They probably will later on, but they need some ideas that they can explore, and then wrestle with as a project team. Talk to carbon specialists and say, do you think this could work? If yes, why? And how do we try and take this forward? If no, why as well? And so the idea being that you're meeting them at a point in the project lifecycle, which has an appropriate amount of information at that point. And so that's where the AI assistant's been helpful, because it means you get hopefully some sound ideas early on, which can then be explored, debated, and then taken forward in conjunction with carbon specialists and others in the wider project environment.
Can we maybe take one of the industry you're serving from linear infrastructure? I mean, in either energy or water. I know that you are also quite active in both. Really interested in um, what what was pushing your customer to make this move, to make this requirement? Was it regulation? Was it other motivation that were beyond? I mean, take whatever example you want. I think just to refine on the industry itself.
Yeah, sure. So we do a lot of work in the energy sector, and one of our clients is National Grid, who've been excellent in terms of driving through low carbon change. And with them and with others, there's a real ambition, both internally and in the wider industry, to meet decarbonization requirements and that push to net zero, both for the grid itself, but also for some of the work they're doing in terms of their capital infrastructure development. And so there's a recognition that there are these targets that need to be met, but there's also, I think, another recognition that organizations need support from their supply chain to make that happen. That they can do a lot of the work themselves, but it's really when you try and delegate and get others working with you that change can happen. And so we saw something quite similar in New Zealand as well. And so what's been also really interesting is seeing how some of the organizations we worked with in New Zealand a few years ago, and some of the really interesting decarbonization work they were doing. Again, at that point, it was pushed by some regulatory requirements. I think it's been interesting seeing how it might be a organizational or a regulatory target that drives it, but once you get into it, and the processes become clearer, there's often a lot of ambition to try and take it a bit further, to look at new ideas or to say, right, this is what best practice can look like. Let's use that as our base, and then we can use that to then try and replicate, so that individuals don't need to spend quite as much time building infrastructure designs from scratch, but they can say, right, I know that this is an overhead line which is approved, it looks good. I need to amend it to the geographical context where it's going to be built, but you have a good place to start. And that's been something which is really exciting, because it means, particularly for linear infrastructure organizations where might be building a similar type of asset quite often, that having an example of good practice that can be replicated easily helps to be more efficient, and hopefully reduce cost a bit there as well, but also helps to drive down carbon, because they know this is what a good lower carbon example can look like.
And how do you think it's translated in carbon reduction? Because when we follow these steps, I mean, we see that there is a first step where we measure, even though the goal is to reduce, there is some probably deployment, a journey to get there in the adoption journey. So is it something that you've observed as well, and what kind of impact you can see today for specific infrastructure in terms of carbon reduction efficiently?
Yeah, it takes time. I think it's something which will require investment and time. s- not only because the infrastructure that is being worked on it is complex, it's big, there's often a regulatory component, there's an investor side to it, so it's there's a complexity of it, but it's also that there are there's quite set expectations of what good can look like when you're doing carbon assessment. So it's interesting because as you start to go through it, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm at first, and this is something we need to do. But just like with any change cycle, there'll then be maybe a bit more hesitation as it gets a bit trickier about how you try and embed it into existing workflows, or how do you train individuals quickly enough, or how do you make sure that the targets you're meeting are kind of what you want them to be, and how do you try and make sure that you are reporting in a really sound way and everything's auditable, and that you are meeting these ambitious targets. It's tricky, but I think by recognizing that whatever tool you choose, that is a way to maybe operationalize it, but it's insufficient by itself, and it has to be done with good behavior change, with good engagement about how do you approach any transformation journey, and that is saying here's why we're doing it, here's why we think it's important, here's why you might benefit from it as an individual, and here's why it's part of a bigger picture.
Yeah,
And that can really help. It's not perfect. There's always challenges with it, but it is something which, in general, we've seen real appetite for and real enthusiasm for. And I think just the key thing is that whilst a digital tool is, I think, a great way to enable that change, because you can scale things faster. There's learning. You can try and make it really intuitive, so it's engaging. It still ultimately relies on this being seen as something that's a core part of what the organization is looking to achieve, not just as a side project.
I mean, I wanted to react because I really believe in it's not a tool. I mean, we are not just developing a tool, a technical solution. You're accompanying also the transformation, discussing, involving the customer, involving the user. I mean, acting on changing and transforming the way we are approaching things, not only because of a technical solution, but that's a whole a whole change. I'll let you.
But like,
um, uh, yeah, continuing on this transformation journey, and I think we are all interested in discussing how to make this move faster. This level of maturity we are facing, that some countries are moving faster towards sustainability, but how to make sure that the one that will start tomorrow will go faster to carbon reduction. So what do you see? What do you think we can accelerate on that, and what will be the levers to go faster?
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And when you look at there's a huge infrastructure gap as well, and that the amount of infrastructure that's needed to support the population growth we're expecting to see by 2050, but also what needs to be built to meet that growing need. And I think what's also important to recognize as well is that the vast majority of this growth will be in emerging markets, and that there needs to be support to ensure that wherever this infrastructure is being built, that there are standards in place to help to say this is what good can look like, and there's also mechanisms for learning across all markets. And in terms of what can be done to accelerate this, like one is I think digital is a superb way to do it, but digital in and of itself is insufficient. And I think it's really helpful because there's few other ways that you can really scale and adapt learning um, and change ultimately to a specific user's needs in a faster and more inclusive way. And so I think digital is a key way to do that, because regardless of what your job is, if the technology is being developed in a way that can respond to your needs and is seen as something that integrates into how you already work as opposed to something outside of it, that's that's a win. And it just means it's more likely to be adopted over the long haul. So I think, the more that we can use uh, digital to try and drive decarbonization, the better. But it has to be done responsibly, and it has to be done in a way that is contextually aware to the circumstances. And I think, for example, that's where the carbon management framework from FIDIC is excellent, because it says, you can say I'm at level 1, 2, 3, 4, and depending on what level you're at, you can then see what you can hope to achieve at that level, and then you can progress as need be. So that step approach is very helpful. So I think digital being a key one. The second one is the power of procurement, and so we've seen some really interesting things being done by clients, include some who use the Carbon Portal and some who don't, who just do really interesting work in saying, right, we will set what good can look like, but the supply chain has a lot of innovation themselves. And so we might say, right, can you try and reduce the carbon impact of this project by X%? You tell us how you want to do it, but you must demonstrate that you've done this in a credible way. And that's been really interesting, because some of the ideas that come forward are expected. So it might be, right, maybe we try and use a different type of concrete, or use a different type of steel, or whatever that might be. And some of them are really quite different. And so it might be, right, can we repurpose an existing asset, or can we actually build in a way that benefits that uses more nature-based solutions that we may not have thought about before. And I think that's really exciting, because the supply chain will work for that client and needs to achieve things, and they've got their own corporate reasons for doing so. But it also, I think, goes back to the point I mentioned earlier about that curiosity, and that idea of innovation, and that putting the onus and the challenge to a wider group of individuals and organizations, not just the client organization, is really beneficial, because it spurs more learning and more sharing and more collaboration. So I think procurement can be a really cool way to try and drive that change.
Yeah, staying on procurement, because I've also had so many discussions on that kind at some point, when you need to reduce carbon, but what's exactly the incentive for the end of the value chain, for the whole value chain also? And procurement is certainly a way to provide some incentive. Do you have any experience or examples of such incentives that you've seen?
There's a number of organizations in the UK water sector where it's not necessarily that they are asking their supply chain to do this, but it's, I think, an interesting way of how they're working with the water regulator to explore new ways to be rewarded for lower carbon in their capital investment plans and delivery. So, what's been interesting to see is, again, that challenge approach, where they've been able to say to the regulator, right, if we are able to propose this change and be able to demonstrate this reduction of carbon against the baseline, there might be a financial reward for that. And conversely, there has to be some risk and some skin in the game.
Yeah.
That if they don't meet that reduction and they go above the baseline, that there will be a penalty of some sort. And so that over the lifespan, and so over the period of that capital investment program, that they can expect to, if all things go well, receive a financial benefit for reducing carbon. That's a really interesting and very compelling model, and one as well that means that there's a lot of engagement with their supply chain to say, right, we are looking to meet this, but it's down to you as well to help ensure that we can do this. And so it helps us drive that change across the wider community.
Yeah, totally. And these contractual innovation, are something that can be set in place by any organization, anyone, from a procurement perspective. And actually, I was thinking also in terms of maturity. Earlier, we spoke about different geographies, but even within the UK or France or Germany, we know you have this large organization and sometimes municipalities that have not the same level of budget, but still in infrastructure, even though the bigger projects are managed at national level, the length of the network that is maintained is maintained as local level. So do you also foresee a way um, to transfer these good habits and these successes to the rest of the organization, regional, county, or small organization? Yeah, what's your feedback on that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good question, and I think immediately of our work in New Zealand. So New Zealand is, a pioneer for lots of things, including some really interesting work in the carbon space. So we work a fair bit with a range of district councils in New Zealand. What they have in common is, real ambition to say, regardless of the size of your budget, regardless of the size of the community that you have the responsibility for delivering services for, that there is a shared recognition of the importance of doing this in a really responsible and environmentally conscious way. And so, what's been interesting there is I mentioned some of the data sharing, and so how, say you're in the water sector, some of that information can be shared beyond just one organization, and so that what that means is it can be shared with a range of councils, and who may not have the detail or the resources to build it up themselves, but they can all add to it, and then be able to share it and build that up collectively. And that's something that's really important because it means they're hitting policy prerogatives, but also making sure that they're also learning from each other. And I think that's been something which is quite exciting. So yeah, I think even if the some of the work you're doing might be at a national level, and it might be that say there might be only be one energy transmission operator in a certain country, and they're developing some data. But if that can be shared with smaller entities, that's great, because they will find ways to apply it to the areas that they have responsibility for. And ultimately, it's about making sure we don't see mistakes or difficulties as a failure in and of themselves, but it's something that you can really learn from for either later on in that project or for the next one, because there's so much infrastructure to be built, and we need to make sure that every next project takes the lessons from previous ones, to try and make sure that they are responsibly built, and done in a way which can best serve the communities and planet.
Yeah, totally. And in line with that, I think there is no recipe, no general recipe. So we don't know yet what's the best solution, what's the best option. And I liked your pointing out risk here, because I think infrastructure is quite risk averse as an ecosystem, as an industry. Still, if you assess risk or prepare your risk approach as acceptable losses, if you are ready to invest in a system, in an approach that, if it works, these are the benefits. If it doesn't work, I accept that this can be the losses, and then the risk is seen a bit differently, because from the start, it's a potential loss that could happen, and that's fine. And I totally in line with you. I mean, this transformation has to be uh, activated, and to activate it, we need to take decisions, to progress, to act. So that's yeah, that's well pointed. I think that's
And it, and I think it goes back to what was mentioned about um, some organizations in the UK water sector which have agreed certain um, approaches with the regulator, which means that there is some real risk, but also some rewards. So if you do think about carbon in a way that allows you to achieve those targets that you've agreed with the regulator, there is a reward for doing so. But equally, that there is something in place that means that if that isn't achieved, that there is a bit of a risk taken as well. And I think that creating something that's very real there is important, because it does provide that real encouragement to do things in a different and hopefully a better way.
and from from a technology perspective, would you foresee as next steps, either for the carbon portal, or as transformation that is coming into technologies that will potentially accelerate? Even, I mean, maybe in your product roadmap first, what do you see as key enablers to activate this transformation even more? We talked about easier access, a broader user type within an organization. How do you facilitate that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there. Our roadmap is focused around three key areas. So the first one is about collaboration. So making sure that teams collectively can work and very much learn from each other, and that those lessons can be applied to future projects. And so a lot of our roadmap is focused around ensuring we have, yes, the functionality, but also the onboarding and the guidance to make it easy for those lessons to be captured and then reapplied. The second area focuses on BIM and more widely on design. So recognizing that a lot of the individuals we work with are designers and engineers, meeting them where they feel most comfortable. So a lot of the time, that's in various BIM solutions, and more widely looking at design. And so with that is looking at how do you make carbon heat maps easier to interpret? How do you try and look at multiple options? How do you try and make it so that you've got good benchmarks right at the start of the project, and you can say, right, I'm going to be looking at building a building that's going to be around this big, and there's going to be railway tracks nearby because it's going to be linked up to a station terminal, and you can create all these different high level ideas, but also you can then model them really easily. So that's part of what we're looking at as well. And the third bit is related to artificial intelligence, and especially how you can try and take lessons from design, and also kind of nudges and ideas and recognizing what an individual is working on and being very contextually aware, but then also harnessing all the great design data that Mott MacDonald or an organization has developed themselves, done by real individuals making real decisions, sometimes real trade-offs, but always with a view to trying to drive down carbon, and making sure that that is front and center of their experience. And I think the benefit of that is it means that they are still very much making the decision, and that's the view we have there. That an individual will be making the decision, but they might get there faster, or they might be supported in a slightly different and hopefully a more holistic way by using the AI services that we're building.
To bounce on that, I really uh, share also. I mean, collaboration, this capacity to share, to ease the access, to the results, and what do we do with these results? AI is bringing a few questions to that, and one key that I would like to also reflect on is how do we ensure consistency through involving AI? So what's your approach here to balance? Because we know everyone knows the power of AI, but still, if I ask the same question 3 times, I need the same results. And how do
Yeah.
you get there?
Yeah, something which everyone who's used a chatbot of some sort will be aware that ask a question in a slightly different way, you'll probably get a slightly different response. Even if you ask the exact same question, it might come back with a different set of suggestions. So I think the key is being really being really critical of when whatever AI solution you're using is most appropriate. And so if you're looking for ideas for an infrastructure design, that it might be good at ideation, give some good suggestions, and even if it doesn't give you the same results each time, investigating and interrogating the responses it does should hopefully give you a broad picture of that. But I think it's also being critical of that and saying, okay, that's helpful to maybe get started, but I need to talk to my colleagues who are specialists, or I need to talk to a different organization who specializes in a particular sector, or a particular type of design, to really get the really rich, learned experience that they can offer. And so I think that recognition is really important, because in infrastructure, as all the stuff that you work on, and I'm sure many listeners work on as well, these are big projects that have a real impact on the individuals that they use them. and they will be around for many, many years. And we need to make sure that they're developed in a responsible, safe, and hopefully an innovative way as well. That can withstand future climate pressures and other things. And so I think AI is really helpful to get a good sense of how this you might be able to design things and how you can learn from previous ones. But ultimately, it's still really using the technical excellence that specialists have and really leaning into that where that's appropriate to do so.
Yeah, we building the journey, huh? How AI will bring this value to bring sustainability efficiently into the ecosystem. Um, Really important. I think, yeah, there is still a gap. No need to put that aside. Need to work with it until we find the right balance. And still a challenge, but providing also more capability to go faster, which is also a big order in the industry because, I mean, you're working for an engineering firms at the end. Time is money and everywhere actually. So how do we balance all that? Um, really interesting. Thanks for sharing all that. Maybe one last question regarding Moata. Maybe you will share also what's the meaning of Moata. There is a meaning behind Moata. Let's start with that.
Yeah, sure. So a lot of the work we do, as I mentioned, was in and continues to be in New Zealand. So Moata is a it's not an acronym. It's a Maori word that was identified by a number of colleagues in New Zealand as being appropriate for what we're looking to do. So the rough translation is preparedness or readiness, which when you're building and designing big infrastructure, felt like an appropriate way to do so, as well as a reflection of the heritage of where the solution came from.
Yeah, fantastic. I love that. The one key element into that, I think, even from an engineering perspective, is that um, building such approach, activating this transformation, is really important. How do we engage your peers into that? How do we not be seen as this is my competitor's solution, but this is going into the right direction? How can we, embrace it or encourage it and without fighting to each other? Because at the end, our goal is all the same: act for sustainability. You know, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely it. I mean, there's so much infrastructure that's going to be um, that's going to be designed and built for the coming decades, and the I think there's a real aspiration to see how there can be a complement to help make all that infrastructure be built and designed, of course, in a better way. And so, whilst I think it's healthy to have some competition, because that breeds innovation, breeds growth, and helps make things move forward. There's definitely a space for sharing lessons, and ensuring that in various markets that there are different solutions available. I think it's really important because it does mean that some will develop and change to reflect those needs, and others can learn from it. And also, some organizations might focus in certain countries, and so the lessons that can be gleaned from those countries can be applied in other ones. And I think it's a really really powerful thing, and I think that's why you're seeing ever more collaborations, either formal or informal, between organizations who work in roughly similar areas, because there's a recognition that the market is not saturated. It's something which can continue to grow, and that there is space for multiple organizations and digital approaches to act in a complementary way, as opposed to saying, right, only one can be done and used.
Yeah, and thanks a lot for sharing, David, here today. And maybe getting close to the end, I have one final question on my side. That is really important is that you are, as many people that are listening here, you have started somewhere, and many people wanted to act and want to have an impact within their company, have an impact with their work. So any suggestion for people that are listening that wanted to act, transform their team, transform the way the work is being done, transform the approach of a specific customer, what would be your advice?
Yeah, I think it's just to be curious and get going. And so things will take time. Of course they will. Anything worth doing, will take a bit of time to get it going. But that's okay. And I think we need to make sure that we're not letting perfect be the enemy of the good here. And so what I mean by that is thinking about carbon at the earliest stages of a project is so important and so helpful, because it means that you can directly inform the impact that infrastructure project will have, when it's being used by lots and lots of people. And whilst it might mean, as you're getting used to how to think about carbon, or you might not necessarily have all the carbon assessments and support that you need right up front, especially if you're just starting out, at least you're thinking about it and you're making these changes, you're making these decisions and these ideas and trade-offs and collaborations maybe. And it doesn't need to be perfect to get going. Certainly, as you go through a project life cycle, as you do more and more of it, it will become more professionalized. You will have more detail. You will have more teams to draw upon for expertise. But you're starting from a position of curiosity and of commitment. And so, I guess my lesson and suggestion is it's okay to not know everything up front, but at least you're trying. At least you're trying to move forward, and come up with something which is better than maybe the current process. And so, not letting perfect be the enemy of the good there, I think is really really important, because we know we need to build infrastructure, but we must do it in a responsible way. And I think that's what makes the sector so exciting.
Thanks a lot, David. Thanks a lot. If I rephrase, would it be correct to say start with what you have, but do something and just act with where
Yeah,
you stand with this belief?
yeah,
Excellent.
I think that's it.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Do you want to add anything, David, that we may have missed in our conversation?
No, I think it's exciting to see this podcast, which is in its first few episodes, be out there in the market. I think it's something which a lot of individuals hopefully have some interest in, because of the scale of what infrastructure can offer. And it also helps to kind of demystify a few things. So I think sometimes it's easy to take infrastructure for granted, because you engage with it every day. If you're at the bus stop, or you're going to an airport, or you're I don't know, going to a ferry terminal, or whatever you're doing. It's just part and parcel of how our world works. But I think that's also kind of the hidden beauty of it, that it is something which is so fundamental to the way we live, and that individuals are responsible for designing it and considering it, and in this case, trying to make it more sustainable and have a lower carbon impact. And so I think that's what's really exciting about this podcast, is it's helping to demystify that, both in terms of what carbon is and why it's important to think about it, but also infrastructure more widely, and the sizable, long-standing impact that will have on individuals' lives.
No better conclusion. Thanks a lot, David, for accepting the invitation and for sharing your views and insights. And I think it will be a good for everyone that is listening. So thanks a lot, and see you soon.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks so much for having me.